Evening. Welcome to our Global Trade and Political Economy, Economics 330 at the City University of New York, Medgar Evers College. Today is March 26th, 2024, and this begins the formal lecture part of this week's office hour. Between last week and this week, we have covered thus far in Module 8, International Monetary Relations and Global Trade Relations. As we continue in this ninth week and our second segment in Module 8, we will discuss theories of trade, the evolution of multilateral and bilateral trading agreements. Special attention would also be given to regional trade agreements. Finally, we will discuss trade regimes and how they affect relationships between nations and groups within a country. Trade can be a contentious issue because interest groups and the broader public view their welfare as being more affected by trade policy than by monetary, investment, and financial policy. Thus, business, labor, agricultural, consumer, environmental, cultural groups try to influence the government's trade policies. The forces of globalization also continue to have a major effect on trade relations. Consider that from 1950 to 1973, world economic output, or GDP, grew at an average annual rate of 5.1%, while trade increased on average by 8.2%. From 1974 to 2007, the figure were 2.9% for GDP growth and 5.0% for trade growth. The growing interdependence of states has also made trade relations more vulnerable to economic downturns. Thus, the 2008 global financial crisis precipitated drops in global production and trade, first in the developed economies, then in developing countries. Recall that in previous class some weeks ago, I introduced the phrase economic contagion. That is, when an economic activity that happens in a specific country or region metastasizes into other regions of the world. More recently, last week's lecture included why, in effort to promote their exports, many countries engage in the competitive undervaluation of their currencies. If you remember, we talked about exchange rate regimes, and we talked about the attraction, or at least the seeming likelihood that if a country were to undervalue their currency, that their products and services will be more competitive in other countries. And I also pointed out that pursuing a realistic perspective, of course, that other nation states may be tempted to also undervalue their currency as well in order to gain even more trade advantage. I also mentioned that this could very well lead to what is now called competitive undervaluation. In this case, everybody loses. And if you think back even more weeks ago, we discussed the prisoner's dilemma, and that was it was instructive why we covered the prisoner's dilemma, to understand the value of international cooperation, how nation states, obviously in this case as against individuals in the prisoner's dilemma example, how nation states are better off when they cooperate, how they reach closer to optimal outcomes when they cooperate. So as you will recall, my lecture included the definition, advantages and advantages thereof. These include fixed exchange rates. As you know, also known as the gold standard. We also discussed last week, if you will recall, floating exchange rates. We also discussed pegged exchange rate system, which incorporates aspects of floating and fixed exchange rates. So if pegged exchange rate will go something like a currency would be pegged at, say, let's say the currency of a country is called a widget, and that country sells most of its goods and services to the United States. The country can say, we're going to peg our currency to the dollar. But if they were to peg it 1-to-1, you could see how their goods may not be very cost competitive, especially if the same goods can be manufactured in Mexico, where their currency, the peso, is much less valuable than 1-to-1 parity with the dollar. So that country X may say they will peg that currency, which in this case we're calling widget. They may peg it at 5-to-1. So that currency, regardless of whether the dollar rises or falls, that currency will be pegged at 5 widgets to $1. The advantage of this, obviously, is certainty and stability. I also mentioned that pegging, if you remember last week's lecture, I also mentioned that pegging is also helpful when you want to consider a nation's currency in relation to the currency where they either trade the most or hold the most debt. So again, if you were to live in this country X and you trade with America and you borrow from America, but you're going to sell your goods and services inside your country, which for the purposes of this example is called country X. You can see how if the value of your currency, which we're calling widget, drops, if you borrow at 5 widgets to $1 and you're creating goods and services in your country to sell, and then the value of your currency, the widget, drops to 20-to-1, you can see how it may be impossible for you to service that US debt, because the value of your profits that you are generating from the loans you took to purchase that manufacturing or production of that goods or service has fallen. So now you have a choice to jack up your price, in which case you get into what is called the elasticity of demand in economics. And some of you economics or finance and business majors may have covered this. You will find out that if you jack up the price, you might lose some sales. And that although you are selling at a higher price, your cumulative profit margin may be lower because you have less people buying your goods and services. So to create market certainty, you can see how it will make sense for country X to peg their currency against the dollar, so that as the dollar moves, the value of that currency moves. The downside, of course, is that one of the tools that a country might use to influence the value, the rates of inflation and investment in that country is through monetary policy. But when you peg your country, you lose some of that ability, right? And that's really the challenge. So we also discussed how exchange rate regimes can affect the balance of payment of countries. It should be noted, however, that the practice of adopting non-market measures to manipulate currency valuation can raise the possibility of a trade war. Indeed, in your reading assignment for this week, it includes tariffs and counter-tariffs between US and Chinese governments, especially during the Trump administration. Furthermore, note that the trade and foreign investment are closely related, and multinational corporations have considerable influence on trade issues and intra-firm trade within multinational corporations account for about a third of total world trade. So, as we continue with this second of the 3 segments in Module 8, we will discuss theories of trade, the evolution of multilateral and bilateral trade agreements. Special attention will be given to regional trade agreements as well. Finally, we will discuss trade regimes and how they affect relations between nations and groups within a nation. One of the biggest trade, as a general proposition, let me back up. I should say that there is a growth in membership in regional trade bodies, and indeed in the formation of regional trade bodies. One of the outliers in the recent past has been the United Kingdom voting to exit the European Union, which, as you know, is not just a trading bloc, is an economic community. So it is not uncommon that countries vote to leave trade associations. So the European Union is a common market, unlike most trade regional associations, as we will soon discuss. So the learning objectives for this week is that at the conclusion of this week, you will be able to discuss the following. Explain multilateral trade relations during the last 2 centuries. So one of how I will think about this learning outcome is from the Silk Road to today's Belt and Road Initiative, which is, of course, is the signature trade and investment program from China. From North America Free Trade Agreement to the United States-Canada Agreement. So as I hope everyone in the class knows, there used to be a North American Free Trade Agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, which was renegotiated during the Trump administration into United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. From the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade to the birth of the World Trade Organization, trade has played an important role in supporting economic development, promoting peaceful relations among nations. The second is to describe the evolution of international trade organizations, such as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Trade Organization, and regional trade associations. And here's how I will think about it. As we discussed in previous lectures, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, evolved into World Trade Organization to include trade in services and intellectual property protection, while regional trade associations such as the USMCA, ASEAN, the European Union, CARICOM for the Caribbean, has forged free trade zones to common markets that create economic interdependencies, and as a result, disincentivizes conflict. You kind of don't want to fight with the person that you buy a lot of goods and services from, because that will be counterproductive. So you know, that is important to really process. So the third learning outcome, is to explain why trade among nations is potentially advantageous to all trading partners. If you remember weeks ago, we discussed the concept of absolute advantage and competitive advantage. And so the way I would contemplate this learning outcome is to say that all things being equal, trade among nations is advantageous to all trading partners because leveraging the comparative advantages of each country enhances efficiency of global supply chains. This allows countries to grow their economy through the sale of goods and services where it has comparative advantage, while still being able to enjoy the goods it imports from trading partner countries with comparative advantage in the imported goods and or services. Let me quickly add that the technical terminologies for this week include, as previous, absolute advantage, comparative advantage, and opportunity cost. And let me quickly talk about how the inner relationship between comparative advantage and opportunity cost. So the United States is blessed in several ways, as an example, because it has tropical and subtropical climates. So you can grow sugar in Louisiana. In theory, you could also grow bananas and have banana plantations in Florida. But let's think about this a little bit now. Let's think about Key West, and let's think about Miami, and let's think about other big cities in Florida that generates a lot of revenue from trade, generates a lot of revenue from banking and financial services. Alternatively, and retirement homes as well. Alternatively, you could knock down those skyscrapers and rewild the entire ecosystem and set up banana plantations. I suspect the current economic model it's going to be a little bit more profitable than if they were to set up banana plantations. So while in absolute terms, Florida can change its economy to growing bananas, you would find that the opportunity cost of growing these bananas, that is, the price of what it will cost to set up these banana plantations, plus the value of the profits that you will give up from all the other industries that are taking advantage of Florida's geographic location, is the opportunity cost. I suspect the opportunity cost will be higher than the profits from selling banana. In this case, it makes sense then to outsource banana production and plantation to Central, South America, and the Caribbean, and then have Florida concentrate on being a tourism center and all the other industries that it has. Then it can trade with the Caribbean countries. They can sell banana to Florida and the rest of the United States, and we can sell them all the other things that we can make comparatively with comparative advantage. So this is how you think about whether you want to, an economy should go down a certain path. It's not just the cost of pursuing that economic growth path, but the cost of what you would have to give up as a result of pursuing that growth strategy. That is your opportunity cost. Let me also remind you that our word of the week, technical phrases and terminologies, signal your technical subject matter knowledge to your audience. Now, to their meaning. As I was beginning to explain, absolute advantage refers to the ability of a country or an entity to more efficiently produce a greater quantity of goods and or services than the competition. The theory of absolute advantage, as we've covered in previous classes, dates back to Adam Smith, an 18th century Scottish economist and philosopher who was a pioneer in the field of political economy. And I know many of you got that Smith answer right in the quiz from a few weeks ago. Ian Smith's seminal economic book, The Wealth of Nations, he theorized that countries should focus on goods they can produce efficiently and use trade as a way to acquire anything they are not able to make themselves. Comparative advantage refers to the ability of a country or an entity to produce goods or services at a lower opportunity cost compared to the competition. Remember what I said, that you have to give up the cost of producing something is not just how much it costs to invest in the production capacity of that good or service, but it is also weighed against what you're going to be giving up because you're choosing to produce that gives the value of what you're going to be giving up because you're choosing to go down this economic path. And that is the opportunity cost that can help a country determine whether it should trade or produce a certain goods or service. Opportunity cost, to reiterate, refers to what you have to give up to buy what you want in terms of other goods or services. When economists use the word cost, we usually mean opportunity cost. So it is sort of like, for an individual, here's the way to think about it. Maybe it will bring the definition home. If you have $10 and you absolutely need to spend that $10 before the day is over, you could buy, I don't know, a fancy cake for $10, or you could buy, I don't know, a basketball game at the local high school. If you choose to go attend the basketball and spend the $10 on that basketball, the cost of that basketball is not just $10, but it's $10 plus the cake that you gave up eating, because that is the true price you paid for attending that game. You paid $10 and then you paid the price of not being able to eat a cake that you would have enjoyed. And that's the opportunity cost. And that's how you measure your true cost. Learning outcomes. Upon the completion of this week, you will be able to do the following. Distinguish the contrast between GATT and WTO. Explain the role of North American Free Trade Agreement. Describe and explain the role of other regional trade agreements, such as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, SCN, and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. And describe and apply theories of trade, such as comparative advantage. So before I open the floor to questions, let me congratulate the class, first of all, for being well on our way to a successful completion of week 9, Global Trade Relations, the second of 3 segments in Module 8. And with that, I open the floor to any and all questions. And if it's okay with the class, I am also going to stop the recording. That way we can have a conversation.